It was 15 years ago that we started the development of the communication
Wow.
function classification system when I was doing my postdoc at Michigan State. So I appreciate you all still letting me come back and talk about it. And it's
So
been
Mary Jo,
10.
you're not in slideshow if you want to be into the slideshow with this for this.
Oh, okay. Wonder why, because it is on my screen.
Um,
Let me try again.
okay.
Um,
Well, I don't know, but we
yeah,
can see
we'll
the
just,
slides fine. So just go ahead.
okay. And it was 10 years ago that we published the first paper on the CFCS. And since then, um, part of the problem was the fact that we didn't know, we didn't have one way to measure communication in cerebral palsy. So I guess some of that has improved. The paper's now been identified over 300 times. It's been translated into 25 languages. So what's next, and what are we working on now? Um, and so just to remember, I think lots of people have seen this, but the CFCS is the analog to the gross motor function classification, the GMFCS, and the MAX, the manual ability classification system. And it goes from a CFCS level of 1, where people are effective sending and receiving with everybody, all their communication partners in real time, down to least functional level 5, where people at CFCS level 5 seldom are effective senders and receivers, even with people that know them well. So we have the different pages of that. And I wanted to remind you all that when we started this on page 2, I highlighted this communication methods section, which tries to look at all the ways the person is communicating, including using different types of AAC. I like to call that the forgotten box of the communication methods, uh, because while many research projects are reporting CFCS levels, very few are reporting what kind of communication methods are used by individuals with CP. Therefore, last year I was very excited to see this paper get printed in the August edition of Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology, and I was asked to write a commentary on it. So here's the first paper I know that gives us population registry data from the Swedish Sea Pup about what percentage of kids had different CFCS levels, and more exciting, what kind of communication methods are they using? And so we see that a lot of the kids are functioning at the most functional level of CFCS level 1 at 45%, but that suggests then we've got 55% of the kids that do not um, have that facility with their communication. And what's new data is that as you look at their communication methods, that most of the kids who aren't using speech are communicating with unaided ways of communicating, eye gaze, facial expression, gesturing. And speech generating devices are only being used by 81 kids. And I don't think that's just specific to Sweden. Um, and so what they have said to us is their conclusions was that we need to get young kids with CP exposed to aided AAC, including speech generating devices, and more of the kids need to receive aided AAC. And my commentary on this, especially those who are not at CFCS level 1, should all be considered for potential use of AAC. They're also talking about the need for longitudinal studies to measure communication ability and communication method, as well as just giving a child AAC communication method doesn't make them able to use it. So we also need to somehow capture the amount, the type of AAC intervention that the child receives. And why do I think communication methods are important to report? It helps to decrease misclassification of CFCS levels. We get some misclassification when people are saying somebody's at the most functional level, level 1, able to communicate with familiar and unfamiliar people, and they say they're only using sounds, and that's probably a misclassification. I think it's also important that we keep increasing awareness of all communication methods used by an individual. So I still hear about teams that don't know all the multiple ways that that the individual with CP is using to communicate with. And so something like this may help us continue to ask. I think sometimes what happens is parents or caregivers think that if they're not meeting with the speech language pathologist, that the provider they're meeting with um, isn't really interested in this area. And I don't think that's true, but I think it's a misconception of what the caregiver may think the purpose of the meeting is. I also anecdotally, and we need more research on this, is that if we can get effective use of communication methods, we may be able to get individuals to change and get to more functional levels. So we have anecdotal information that an individual at CFCS level 4 with their sometimes effective communicating with familiar partners can, with a speech generating device, can now change their communication to level 2, being able to communicate with unfamiliar partners as well as familiar partners, even though it may take them a little longer to put their messages together. There's a lot of brain-computer interface research happening, and as that becomes more effective, then our individuals with cerebral palsy who might have trouble with motor access to a speech generating device may be able to move from a CFCS level 2 to a CFCS level 1 to be better able to communicate in real time. So CFCS levels have helped to raise the communication issues in CP. We need to figure out more about how to focus on increasing research in what kind of communication methods and the type and the relevant intervention with those methods need more emphasis and study. So what are the barriers? How are we going to demonstrate this effective intervention and ensure that all our children and adults with CP are provided with all the communication methods as early as possible? And the references.
Thank you, Mary Jo. That was great. You know, I really struggle to get people that are CFCS 2 and 3 interested in AAC. They seem to feel that as long as they can do any kind of verbal communication, they don't not really all that interested. They don't want to use it. What's been your experience with that?
Well, I think it gets back to having functional reasons and communication partners where it's going to make a difference. And I think it's going to make a difference in employment. It's going to make a difference perhaps in post-secondary education. And so when they're going to have those unfamiliar communication partners. So I think as like many things, it all goes back to participation and trying to encourage our individuals with cerebral palsy to think big for participation.